Welcome to the FY25 Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Program Workshop. Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Heather Barrett. I'm the Administrator of Architectural Research at the Trust. I co-administer the Non-Capital Grant Program with Chief Archaeologist Matt McKnight. Today's agenda includes an introduction to the program, a discussion on project eligibility, the nitty-gritty of budget and grantee contribution, online application tips, selection criteria and process, and grants administration. There'll be 3 of us speaking today. Important documents to consult include our non-capital grants guidelines and manual. That's probably the most critical. And then we've also posted our intent to apply form and a sample grant application on our website. Both of those last 2 items will need to be submitted through our online application system. It is a 2-part application process. So I'll give you a brief overview of the program. It's designed for research, survey, planning, and educational activities involving architectural, archaeological, and cultural resources of our state. The available funding for this year includes $300,000 that has been distributed to MHT from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority Financing Fund. Eligible applicants include nonprofit organizations, and that includes state and federal agencies, as well as local jurisdictions. Nonprofit organizations must be registered with SDAT, that's the Department of Assessment and Taxation, and be in good standing. Nonprofits must have a letter from the IRS documenting their status by the time of the award. Grantee contributions to the project include local governments matching the grant 1-to-1 in cash and/or in-kind services. It can be any combination thereof. There's no set percentage dedicated to each of those categories. There's no match required for nonprofit organizations. Providing some sort of contribution does enhance your application. Eligible activities include architectural and archaeological survey work, National Register nominations, and that includes multiple property documentation forms, HSRs, thematic research that supports the development of historic contexts, preservation plans, and then a variety of educational and outreach activities related to preservation. There's a whole long list of eligible activities in our grant guidelines. I believe it's page 4. And feel free to give us a call to discuss specifics. We continue to have a special set of funding priorities that focus on research and survey projects. So they include broad-based, comprehensive, and systematic archaeological and architectural surveys to identify and document previously unknown, little studied, or threatened resources. Projects designed to assess, document, or address the impacts of natural disasters and ongoing natural processes on our cultural resources. And then those projects that undertake detailed, in-depth study of a specific topic, site, time period, property type, or theme. We do not fund projects that involve capital expenditures, so no bricks and mortar projects for us. There are other programs at MHT dedicated to these kinds of expenses. We do not fund the development of exhibits from existing museum collections, nor projects that seek to conserve or catalog historic archival collections. This does not include artifacts, and I'll get to that a bit later. We do not fund publications of previously completed manuscripts or projects that are already underway. We have a series of program requirements, and those include that architectural and archaeological research and survey projects must be consistent with MHT standards and guidelines. You see the documents for each discipline here, and they're available on our website. The personnel performing architectural and archaeological survey work must meet the minimum requirements of the Secretary of Interior's professional qualification standards. That's 36 CFR 61. You put that in Google, it'll pop right up. For archaeological investigations, the result in recovery of artifacts, the application must state where and how those artifacts will be cared for and stored. Please consider curation at the Mac Lab in St. Leonard, Maryland. Their website is listed right there for your convenience. For projects involving only one resource, that resource must be listed in the National Register of Historic Places or determined eligible by MHT's director. For projects involving GIS or spatial data development, the grantee must provide copies of all databases, image files, and GIS files. So where to begin? I've already spoken a bit about the project guidelines and manual that's available on our website. There's also an online applications quick start guide that's available to give you pointers on the online grant system. So you'll be creating a username and password so that you can access the online application. It's important to identify application items with the longest lead times and create a schedule for yourself so that you can get everything done in time. Read through all the questions and familiarize yourself with the application and the required attachments. Look for the attachments tabs. People often overlook those at the top of the page. So where do you start when you're developing your project? What kind of project is it? What's your scope of the entire project from start to finish? What's the cost for the entire project? Do you have other funding sources available to you? Should the project be broken down into phases? So is it a multi-jurisdictional or multi-phased project that you might be coming in for later grant rounds? Will your organization be able to manage the project? And so there are several main sections to the application, and these include project budget, project description, that's your scope of work, including the project overview and methodology. Those are the two most important sections of the application. The others include timeline, a statement of significance and need, project focus, so you'll be picking one of these: research and documentation, educational projects, or preservation planning projects. And then there's a section for project management. So to give you some additional details to think about as you're developing your application, for the scope of work, what are you including in your grant request? What is not included? Be very specific with your scope of work. So again, is it a phased project? What can you reasonably accomplish within a 2-year grant period? In the schedule, you'll want to identify all the steps necessary for the process. So you might begin with the grant award, a research design, field survey, a research phase, preparing forms, whether those are site forms or Maryland inventory forms, nominations, a context report, whatever your deliverables are. Really show us that you know the steps that are involved. Both for the grant funds and then your contributed funds, those must be spent on your project within that 2-year period. And then finally, what are your goals for the project? What do you hope to achieve? How much money do you have? How much match do you really have? These are all questions that you should be thinking through and that will need to be addressed within your application. Also remember that MHT needs to be scheduled within your timeline for our reviews. And then here's the budget spreadsheet. We do have a maximum award of $75,000. They've typically ranged from about 10 to 50, 55,000. We have yet to award $75,000 for a single project. This spreadsheet reflects how you've defined your project. So all expenditures of the grant and match need to be defined here. The project should be understandable in the context of what you've requested. So we don't want to know just that we're paying for a $20,000 of a $60,000 project. We want to know the details. What's that $20,000 covering? So for project costs that we cannot fund, we do not fund legal or appraisal fees, insurance premiums, food and beverage costs for events, state staff time or funds. No, we do not fund payment to any MHT staff or Board of Trustees member or costs incurred or work accomplished prior to the approval. Look for awards to be announced in November of 2024. It usually happens within the first 2 weeks of November. So for grantee contributions, I'll give you a little more detail here. Again, it's that one-to-one for local governments, cash and or in-kind services. No contribution is required for nonprofits. It is not necessary to propose a contribution in excess of the one-to-one. It will not improve your score, and in fact, it makes your life and our lives a bit more complicated. Include additional costs kind of outside the realm of other project costs on your application. And some things to keep in mind as far as documentation for cash, it can be expenditures on services or non-state grants that could be paired with our grant. For in-kind contribution, think of things like volunteer hours. And then how are you going to document those? All expenses must be properly documented in order to contribute to the grant. And then tips on a successful grant application. You want to be convincing about your significance and urgency of the project. We've had people in the past put non-applicable there. We want to know why you think this is an important project to fund. Know what expertise the project requires and assemble a strong project team. Show us your commitment to the project. Show us you know what it takes for a successful project. So, for example, in a rural historic district that you're doing a large nomination for, perhaps you're going to need an archaeologist. Perhaps you'll need an architectural historian and maybe a cultural landscape historian. So really know what that team looks like. Review and understand our selection criteria. Address those in your application. Matt will go over the criteria for selection later in the presentation. Be clear and concise in all your responses. Make it easy for us. If we're asking too many questions about your application, it's probably not going to bode very well for a successful application. And then think about proposing a project that falls within those FY25 priorities that I discussed. Know how your project relates to local and state planning goals. We just released our statewide preservation plan for the next 8 years. And so check that out. It's available online. And then finally, cultivate support for your project. Develop those relationships with the community, with your local, state, and federal representatives, and other organizations that may have similar preservation goals. Thank you, and I'm going to pass it along to Allison Lutheran to go over application tips.
Hello, I will be discussing the online grant application process. If you go to the Maryland Historical Trust's grant webpage, you can scroll down to the bottom and find the link to the Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Program to the left. Once on the non-capital grant webpage, you will find a lot of useful information about the program. The resource panel on the left includes guidance documents, such as the grant guidelines and manual, a sample application form, and an application quick start guide. The application is a two-stage process. It begins first with an intent to apply form, or ITA. Begin by clicking the My Grants account button on the non-capital grants page. You will then be prompted to either sign in to an existing account that you have from a previous MHT grant or create a new account if you have never applied for a grant with MHT before. The ITA is a short, basic questionnaire that asks about your proposed project. Submission of the ITA is due July 1st, 2024. The second stage is the full application. You can begin once it has been released to your online account. You will receive an email notification about this. Make sure to log in using your same credentials as you did before. The application is a longer form with multiple pages or tabs. Submission of the full application is due August 1st, 2024. If you do need to create an online account, click the New Applicant link at the bottom of the sign-in page. Enter your email address and create a password. When working on the ITA, you have the option to save a draft and finish later. Saving the ITA will return you to the My Account screen. You will receive an email reminder that you have saved but not submitted your ITA. Once you have completed your ITA and filled in all required fields, click the Review button. If you missed any required fields or uploads, they will be identified in red. You will not be able to see the Submit button until all of the required fields have been completed. If you have missing information, update the required fields, then click the Update button on the Review My Application page. After the ITA is submitted, you will receive a confirmation email. When you are ready to begin the full application form, you will need to log back into your online account. Once in your online account, select the grant application you want to begin or continue working on. Always log into your account from the My Grant Account button to avoid creating a new application form each time you log in. Select the application you want to begin or continue working on. Navigate between sections by clicking on the tabs at the top of the page. Clicking Next will take you to the next tab and save your work. The red asterisk means a response or upload is required. The word counter will count as you type. Clicking the check mark to the right of the field will check spelling. The application can't be submitted without all required responses and all required uploads. If you are unclear about the meaning of a question, you can click the I or info box and a pop-up window will open up with additional guidance. After 45 minutes of inactivity, the grant application system will time out. This pop-up will appear to give you notice of the timeout. It is important to save frequently as you fill out the application. Your work will not automatically save if the system times out. As a tip, you may wish to compose long text responses in a word processing document first, and then copy and paste into your application as a safeguard against losing work. The application will require that you upload documents. Click on Choose File and navigate to the file you want to upload. When you have selected a file, the file name will appear on the right, then click Upload. Click Remove if you accidentally uploaded the wrong document. Please do not upload individual image files. Instead, combine all of your images and captions into one Microsoft Word or PDF document, which can then be a single upload. Please note that saving the application returns you to the My Account screen and does not actually submit the application. When you have just saved the application, you may receive a reminder email that you have not actually submitted yet. Once you have completed the application, filled in all required fields, and uploaded all required documents, click the Review button on the Attachments page, or simply click the Review My Applications tab. If you have missed any fields or required uploads, they will be identified in red. You will not be able to see a Submit button until all errors have been corrected. If you have missing information, update the required fields, then click the Update button on the Review My Applications page. When you are satisfied with your application and completed all required fields, click Submit. You must complete the application and click the Submit button by the final submission deadline of 11:59 p.m. on August 1st. If you don't submit by that time, you will not be able to submit at all. The system does not allow late applications. You will not be able to submit an application unless all required fields are filled in and all required documents are uploaded. Once you have submitted an application, you will not be able to make any changes. You will, however, still be able to view it by selecting Submitted Applications from the drop-down menu of your online account. After submission, you will receive a confirmation email that the application was received. We will contact you if we have any questions. And now I'll leave you with some final tips for completing the application. Make sure to include all required attachments and make all required responses. You can't submit without this. Submit a complete application online by 11:59 p.m. on August 1st. Do not wait until the last minute. Double-check math, spelling, and grammar. Fortunately, the online application has functions to help you with this. If you have problems with the online application, please contact Heather Barrett or myself for architecture projects and Matt McKnight for archaeology projects by telephone or email. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matt McKnight, and I am the Chief Archaeologist here at the Maryland Historical Trust. And I'm going to be covering the remaining slides, talk about the selection criteria, the selection process, and grant administration should you be successful and receive a grant from us. Grant applications must be submitted online by 11:59 p.m. on August 1st, 2024, and unfortunately, late applications cannot be accepted. I know we've brought this up a few times, this deadline, but we want you to be aware that we will not be present here at MHT offices at 11:59 p.m. And so we really encourage our applicants to try and actually get their applications submitted earlier than that, so that if you run into some sort of last minute technical problem or you have any sort of issues, that there is still time to assist you and to help you get your application in by the deadline. So again, we cannot accept anything late after you submit your application. The steps in the process are that MHT will initially conduct a threshold review of the application just to make sure that the tasks that are outlined in your proposal are actually things that we can pay for with non-capital grant funds, and that they are actually non-capital tasks. And so we will also look at your type of organization to determine whether or not it actually fits into one of the categories outlined for you earlier in the slide presentation that are eligible. And then a select group of staff will review the applications. Those staff are selected based on their disciplines that they are experts in, and they will reevaluate, rank, and recommend the actual funding levels for your grant. So do be aware that those funding levels can differ. If you get an award letter, those funding levels can differ from what you requested, so keep that in mind. The MHT Board of Trustees will then review the recommendations that the staff has made, and if they concur with those at the board meeting that they hold, usually it's their October board meeting, then the recommendation will move forward to the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Planning, who's the individual that ultimately approves the recommendations that have gone forward. And if everything goes according to plan, we anticipate that award letters for the FY25 Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Round process will be awarded in November of 2024. So that's when to expect those award letters to go out. All right, so next we'll talk a little bit about grant selection criteria. First and foremost, within that is the overall significance of the project. So what architectural, archaeological, or cultural significance to the nation, the state, or the local community does the affected resource possess? Then we look at urgency. So you need to explain in your application how the architectural, archaeological, or cultural resource is imminently endangered, whether that be by development pressure, erosion, neglect, age. In the case of an oral history project and you have an informant that's getting all along in years, that could be illness, the age of the folks that you need to interview, or you can explain if there's a unique window of opportunity for completion of the project. So for example, if an architectural resource is having repairs made to it and there is suddenly parts of the building that are exposed that aren't normally exposed, and that would facilitate documentation, you need to explain all that in the urgency section of the application project design. Then we're looking at the project, are the project goals realistic within the proposed time frame, and and looking at the budget, will that project provide a complete product given what you've put forward in the budget? Protective value, there we're looking for you to explain how the proposed project contributes to the long-term preservation, conservation, or documentation of the resource, or to Maryland's heritage overall. And how does the project provide concrete action to protect, conserve, and document those resources? If there's educational outreach value to the project, please explain it and how permanent and far-reaching that educational component will be. Innovation value, there we're kind of looking for, does the project utilize methods or technologies that are transferable for statewide, regional, or local applications? So will the project have potential to sort of serve as a model for future research? Are you doing something new and interesting that we might want others to emulate? Next, we have project impact. So is the project intended to stimulate or prompt other architectural, archaeological, or cultural resource preservation and conservation, documentation, or educational projects, or programs throughout the community that will support professional preservation? And is there local government support for the project that falls under this category as well? Next, we look at professional and administrative capability. So for professional capability, do the project personnel have the necessary training and education, as well as experience to carry out all the specific goals that you've outlined for us? And similar to that, what's the administrative capability of the organization look like? Is there a proven track record for the personnel? Do they have a record of successfully administering grant monies, either MHT projects or other grant programs that are out there that you can tell us a little bit about, your past history with grants? So you need to show basically that you can successfully administer grants, meet project deadlines, and follow all the established procedures that are in the grant guidelines document. Project readiness is whether or not the project can begin on schedule, and will other contributed funds be used, what we used to call match, will those be on hand when they are needed to? So contributed funds, as previously mentioned, not all applicants are required to provide some sort of match, but even if you are not required to provide that, contributing resources, at least some funds or other in-kind support, does offer you some additional points in the project grading scheme for these types of grants. So does the sponsoring organization provide an independent support of some sort for their project, and how much cash or in-kind support is actually being offered by the sponsor? We also look at equitable geographic distribution as determined by MHT staff. So we do really try hard to make sure that non-capital grant funds are being distributed throughout the state as much as possible, in order to ensure that we look back, we will look back at previous awards. We look at U.S. Census data, the National Register listings, to try and see how equitable past grant funds have been distributed, and how your project will either improve on that situation or not. And then finally, there are those FY 2025 special priorities, which you heard mentioned and discussed earlier. And I've put those back up on the screen here again. All right, so now we're going to go over the grant administration schedule, and we've put the intent to apply deadline as well as the completed application deadline back up on the top of the slide just one more time for you, just in case you missed it. These are the dates when we will be expecting those, and we expect to have grant awards to be announced sometime in November of 2024. Once you get those award letters, then MHT will work from November of 24 up through early spring of 2025 to get the grant agreements drafted and through our legal department, and then mailed out to you to be signed. Then once they're signed and fully executed, there is essentially 2 years to complete the project that you described in your grant application. So that places the deadlines for most projects to be completed roughly around May of 2027. So what is the grant agreement? The grant agreement is really a contract between you as the grantee and MHT as the grantor. The grant agreement is going to include a description of the scope of work, which is itself going to include a list of all of your deliverables, so all the things that you basically promised to do as a part of the grant, and a timeline for delivery of those. Sometimes we have to change the description slightly from what you may be putting in your application to kind of put it into a standardized legal language format. So do make sure you read those grant agreements carefully when they come in to make sure everything still lines up with what you're planning on doing. Your grant agreement will also include an itemized budget, including not only the grant amount, but also any additional contributed support for the project, whether cash funds you've promised to provide or in-kind support. So bear in mind that when you promise to make a match or to contribute support, that you are then going to have to eventually document that you've met those promises. So whether it be cash or in kind, we don't want you what we don't want you to do is overpromise at the application stage and then underdeliver later on. So make sure that you're being realistic about what you can provide to support in the application stage so we don't run into problems later on down the line. And then finally, the expiration date is also going to be listed in the grant agreement, and that will be no longer than 2 years from the date of your signature under normal circumstances. So once you have a grant agreement in place, how do you go about having work approved? Generally, we encourage our grantees to set up a project launch meeting or at least to coordinate with your grant monitor in order to get the project fully underway and make sure that everybody is totally on the same page. For archaeological projects, we typically require quarterly progress reports because the possibility of unanticipated finds in archaeology, we really like to be kept abreast of exactly what's going on at all stages of the project. And the quarterly progress reports are a good way for us to all be in the same place as the project progresses. Generally, for non-capital grants, there will be there'll be draft deadlines and final report submittal deadlines in the grant agreement. So you'll want to pay attention to that and to make sure that you meet those deadlines. If there are significant MHT comments on draft materials, sometimes we might require a second review before final submittal takes place, in addition to the draft and the final deadlines for the reports. There are often draft and final deadlines for MIHP forms, whether those are MIHP architectural forms or MIHP archaeology forms. We're going to require drafts to be reviewed first and then final versions. So one of the questions that we always get is, how do grant disbursements work? After I get the grant, how do I get the money? Typically, a small percentage of grant funds are dispersed up front as sort of either just dispersed as startup costs, or when you sign the contract with your subcontractor, depending on the type of project, and that can be ironed out in the grant agreement. Beyond that, additional disbursements are made as the project progresses based on, number one, the submission of satisfactory products. So as MIHP forms come in, as archaeological progress reports come in, as draft reports come in, as long as you are meeting your project deadlines and then you submit a request for payment, what we now actually call the certification of expenses form, we can go ahead and start processing that to get you paid. Payments are only made to the grantees and not to contractors or consultants or other people that you hire that are working for you on the project. So we will pay you, the grantee, only, and then you in turn certify that you have expended those funds for these contractors and consultants and that they are paid by you directly. Typically, we are able to process those certification of expenses forms within about 30 days after the submission of a satisfactory request for payment. And in addition, in anticipation of folks' next question, we can disperse grant funds to you before you pay the contractor or the consultant's invoice, but you need to talk to your grant monitor about that. How is expense documentation handled? This is what the certification of expenses form looks like. In the past, grantees had to actually submit receipts and invoices to MHT as proof that they had paid their subcontractors or consultants. Now what we have is this form where you sign certifying what your expenses have been, and then it is your responsibility to maintain copies of those invoices and keep the receipts and all the supporting documentation for those costs. What we will do is take a random sample of grantees. Each fiscal year, we're going to take a random sample of grantees and ask them to provide that documentation to MHT to show that they have in fact spent the grant funds according to what was proposed. So your organization needs to retain copies of all that financial documentation. So the invoices, the receipts for payment, the individual balances on accounts for the grants as it progressed. All those things, you need to maintain them for a period of 5 years beyond the termination date of your grant. So that would normally be 7 years that you need to keep these things after your grant gets, over the course of the entire grant. We take a look at the certification of expenses forms, and then we pull some grantees, again, at random, and each fiscal year we're going to ask those grantees to provide that financial documentation to us. So in addition to the possibility of being selected for an MHT spot check, you must also comply with all federal, state, and local financial documentation. And so you're going to want to hold on to this stuff. So how does the procurement process work? There are 3 different ways that we can do this under these grants. If you hire a consultant or you need to put together a team, how do you go about doing that? In our grant program, what most people do is they actually put that team forward in the grant application itself. So if you actually have pulled everybody together, come up with this idea, if you list all of those people, you are sort of getting pre-approval at an early stage. So we can then finalize those details as appropriate in the grant agreement. So your team will be sort of named and listed in the grant agreement itself. Contract sourcing criteria can alternatively follow the procurement processes of your organization. What you'll need to do in that case is provide and send copies of those policies to your grant monitor beforehand so that they can then approve them. And then finally, if it doesn't fall into one of those 2 procurement processes, consultants or subcontractors should be procured through a competitive bidding process where you do a traditional request for proposals or RFP, and then you have people respond to that. And your grant monitor can help kind of walk you through that process. So in the final section of this presentation, we're going to go over some of the past projects that we've had in the Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Program as a way to kind of get your creative juices flowing and to get you thinking about the possibilities and how you may want to put together your grant application. So this first one that I have up here is the Baltimore Architecture Foundation's Documenting Early Women Architects in Maryland project. This is a multi-year project that was first awarded funds in FY21, and it received a second award in FY23. This grant has resulted in multiple property documentation forms on early women architects, as well as one individual nomination for the Hirsch House, designed by Pulte Hirsch. Additional women architect designed properties will be nominated in later phases. The Washington College Tracking Native American Cultural Heritage on Maryland's Upper Eastern Shore. It's a mouthful for a project title, but this FY23 non-cap project was designed to help enhance our understanding of the Native American cultural landscape in the Upper Choptank watershed. So the Washington College Archaeology Lab will be conducting archaeological survey and excavation through much of Caroline County for this project. And field and laboratory work will be conducted in all cases as public archaeology endeavors, so that individuals can volunteer and work on these projects. And new Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties, or MIHP archaeology site forms, will be produced. Next, we have the University of Delaware documenting dairy farms in Maryland. This is another multi-year project. So the University of Delaware Center for Historic Architecture and Design is currently completing phase 2 and about to begin phase 3 of this project, which is looking at dairy farms in Hartford, Montgomery, Washington, Baltimore, and Howard counties. Work will include the preparation of MIHP architecture forms, measured drawings for selected buildings, and a brief historic context for each county. And here you can see Linden Farm, some photos of Linden Farm in Montgomery County. In FY21, the Catholic University of America was awarded a grant for their project investigating Jesuit plantation landscapes in Maryland. And that used a combination of remote sensing, which are these techniques that allow allow archaeologists to see into the soil before excavation, as well as traditional archaeological excavation techniques to document how the Jesuits in both southern Maryland and on the eastern shore organized the plantation landscape. The interrelationship of free and enslaved spaces was examined, and work was done with the participation and consultation of descendant communities to produce a final technical report, which we have in our MHT library. This FY22 project was awarded to the University of Maryland to conduct a survey of tobacco barns that date before circa 1870 in southern Maryland. These types of resources are highly endangered due to, functional obsolescence and development pressure in the region. So Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties, architecture forms, and a final survey report were produced as a part of this project. Another new project, the Lost Towns Project, that's the name of the organization, they came up with a project called Curating the Mayer Collection, Artifacts and Records of Archaeological Sites. So in 2023, the descendants of Thomas Mayer donated a collection that he had amassed over 50 years of artifact collecting in southern Maryland and Anne Arundel County. Mayer kept meticulous records of everything he found, and his donation includes topo maps, notebooks, research, and photographs. And this FY23 grant will catalog and rehouse the collection to kind of bring it up to modern standards, produce new and updated MIHP archaeology forms for the sites that Mayer worked on, produce a summary report, and create interpretive materials for the general public. So with that, we want to wish everyone good luck in preparation of your applications. If you have questions following this presentation or you need to help with your online grant application, you can reach out to the individuals that are listed here on the slide. If your question pertains to a standing structure or architecture project, you will want to speak to either Heather Barrett or Allison Luthern. But if it's a question related to an archaeology project, you can either get in touch with myself or with state terrestrial archaeologist Dr. Zach Singer. So thank you everyone for your attention, and again, good luck.